There's been a growing movement over the past 10, 15 years or so for churches to call one of the Sundays at this particular time of year Evolution Sunday. And today there are roughly 15,000 clergy in America who have signed on to this letter that states, "We believe that the timeless truths of the Bible and the discoveries of modern science may comfortably coexist. We believe that the theory of evolution is a foundational scientific truth, one that has stood up to rigorous scrutiny and upon which much of human knowledge and achievement rests. Science and religion are not mutually exclusive." The motto is, "For too long, science and faith have had a combustible relationship, but even churches evolve." With that, I'm going to be looking at today's scriptures, specifically not from the viewpoint of literal truth, of course, but with an eye on the universal truths they share with other cultures and other times. And the similarities are striking. And I think it would be safe to say that the theme of today's scriptures is temptation. I don't know how many of you have felt this way once in a while, or you feel tempted in some fashion to do something or not, but I was reminded of something someone once said, that when you become middle-aged or on up, when you're presented with the choice of two temptations, you always choose the one that gets you home early. But the issues surrounding temptation are universal. They're often described in different traditions around the globe, and curiously, the stories are often similar. Joseph Campbell, in an interview with Bill Moyers, told the story of the Basari people of Africa, who have this story that goes way back into their own lore, and tells about this god called Anumbate. Anumbate, Campbell says, created man and called him man. He created woman and called her woman. He created antelope and called it antelope. Then he created snake and called it snake. You can see where this naming is going. Anumbate gave him a garden and told him not to eat of any of the fruit. So one day the man and the woman decided to eat some fruit, and Anumbate came down and asked them, "Who did this?" And they said, "Snake did." At least in our traditions, the snake actually does something. But it's safe to say that in many of our religious traditions, serpents don't come out well. Blame the snake. So Campbell paired this Anumbate story with this one. And forgive me, I know some of you must know this story. In Native American culture long ago, youths would go away in solitude to prepare for manhood. And so there's this temptation snake story. It's native to America as well, and it became a well-known story. There was a youth who hiked into a beautiful valley. It was green with trees. It was bright with flowers. And there he fasted. And on the third day, he looked up at all of the surrounding mountains, and he noticed one tall, rugged peak. It was capped with this dazzling snow. "I will test myself against this mountain," he thought. And so he put on his buffalo hide, he threw his blanket over his shoulders, and he set out to climb up the peak. And when he reached to the top, he stood up on the rim of the world, and from there, he could see forever. He could see everything. And his heart swelled with pride. And then he heard a rustle at his feet, and looking down, he saw the snake, which unsurprisingly spoke to him. "I'm about to die," said the snake. "It's too cold for me up here, and I'm starving. Put me under your shirt and take me down to the valley." "No," said the youth, "I am forewarned about you. You are a snake. If I pick you up, you will bite, and your bite will kill me." "Not so," said the snake. "You're different. If you do this for me, you will be special. I will not harm you." The youth resisted, but this was a very persuasive snake we're talking about here. And at last the youth tucked it under his shirt, carried it down to the valley, and then he laid it gently on the grass when suddenly the snake coiled, rattled, and leapt, biting him on the leg. "But you promised," cried the youth. "You knew what I was when you picked me up," said the snake, and it slithered away. Listen to echoes of the story of Jesus going out in the solitude and being set upon this pinnacle with the face of temptation represented by the devil. The story of temptation has been told in different ways in different cultures other than our own, and the account told in the Gospel of Matthew and the Native American story both point to the same truth. And in one of those, it's a story of resisting temptation in the face of evil, and in the other, it's a story about giving in. And yet both put forward the same idea that temptations, when you know about the consequences, have to be resisted. So the Basari people in Africa have this story that mirrors our own creation story. There's only one connection between the ancient Hebrews and Ghana, which is the western side of the African continent, and that connection is in the discovery that human life started out in Africa. And therefore this oral tradition about the Garden of Eden is older even than we know from our own. So stories then can be universal. They are true. They are true stories when they point to a truth that resonates with the people who hear them. In 3 cases, we hear a story about yielding to temptation. In the story of Jesus, we hear about standing firm in the face of temptation. And when we hear stories, especially those that have counterparts in other traditions around the globe, sometimes we may not take them seriously, thinking that they lose their truth because they're not found to be a one-of-a-kind original, instead of just the opposite, which is truths are universal. The facts behind them are not as important. The Gospel of Matthew really wants us to know about the temptation of Jesus. Matthew tells us plainly that Jesus was in the wilderness. He was tempted by the devil. He did not say that Jesus wondered, or Jesus imagined, or that he was charmed, or that he considered his options. It says that he was tempted and that he went there to be tempted. And Mark tells us he was tempted, and the Gospel of Luke tells us he was tempted. Surely he must have thought of some easy ways to do what he had to do. That was the temptation of his life. And so there we see him. He was tempted, and from the scriptures we see he was tempted by 3 different things, because we love 3s in the Bible. Jesus was tempted by the wrong use of power. That was the first temptation. Jesus was also tempted by the wrong way to popularity. That was the second temptation. And finally, Jesus was tempted with the wrong kind of partnership. That was the third temptation. In other words, the story of Jesus being tempted is the story of all temptation. It is our story and our relationship to temptation as well. Just read the news. We're each of us tempted every day, and separating the importance of doing what is right from doing what will probably do no harm, as long as it will be a choice that will benefit or enhance us, gets muddy when our own egos get involved. Temptations are all around us these days. Tom Long was my preaching professor, and he was once named one of America's top 12 preachers. And he tells this story about how in the midst of South Africa's struggle against apartheid, one of the most respected voices for racial harmony against apartheid, one of the great voices for human dignity has been that of Bishop Desmond Tutu. But even the closest colleagues of Tutu were sometimes distressed by the bishop's tolerance and moderation. They wanted him to be more aggressive with his opponents. One of them said, at his age, you would think he would have learned to hate a little more. But there's a problem with Tutu, and the problem is that he believes in the gospel message. What he's saying, in effect, is that Tutu knows who he is, remembers what his baptism means, knows the gospel story, and he will not change his script. When I think of some of the temptations that have crossed my path, some resisted, some given into, I imagine that what the scriptures today, as well as what the stories from other traditions are pointing to, leave us all feeling that we have come up short. And I imagine they might make us feel a little alone and a little broken. Because you know what happens with us all. We all go into the wilderness at one time or another. In fact, some of us are just going into a wilderness period. Some of us have been in one at one time or another. And some maybe are just emerging. And you know, we go in more than once in a lifetime. There are many wilderness places in our lives. But in these times, we are offered the wrong answer, the wrong choice, the wrong use of power, the wrong way to popularity, the wrong kinds of associations. This is the first Sunday in Lent, and the faith stories that are presented to us in this particular time leading up to Easter will now take a different tone. They remind us of what it feels like when we're alone out there in the wilderness. They talk to us about how to be in that wilderness, where to look for healing, and where to find help. And you remember that because creation has called us to be here and to be fully human, we're not alone. After all, we share everything in our common origins with all creations from which we have evolved to become the people who remember our connection to this source, even in our own time of wilderness. Welcome to the wilderness. And this is an open table. Whoever you are and wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. I'll ask Pastor Sarah to come forward.